Welcome. My name is Nancy Rappaport, and I'm the interim dean of the William S. Boyd School of Law. We're very, very happy that you're here. We're looking forward to an amazing program, so we want to welcome you to tonight's Saltman Center for Conflict Resolutions. This is going to be a long mouthful, bear with me. Peace in the Desert series. It's a film screening and then a panel discussion on Streetball Hafla, and I have been looking forward to this pretty much since we had the idea in the beginning. It's going to be a remarkable program. I want to brag a little bit about the Saltman Center, though, before we get to the program. It's a dean's prerogative to do that, and I am enjoying doing that. So what I like about the Saltman Center is I consider it a triple threat. The Saltman Center does wonderful, really important scholarship. It teaches courses that law students really need to master, and it reaches out to the community in programs like this. So when we talk about a triple threat, we're also talking about a pretty gutsy triple threat in terms of the programs that you do, Jean, and I'm very happy about it. And tonight will be no exception. So, and again, it's the dean's prerogative to do certain things. So the next thing I want to do is I want to thank our wonderful sponsors for this evening. I want to thank Mike and Sonia Saltman. Michael is here, Sonia is there. I want to thank the Anti-Defamation League, and I want to thank the Las Vegas Review-Journal for their very generous sponsorship for tonight. And I also want to say an extra special thanks to Mike and Sonia, because tonight is the first time I can announce their most recent generous support of the Saltman Center in terms of the naming of the directorship of the Saltman Center. So this is my first chance to say publicly, thank you both very, very much. So as I turn things over to Jean next, is there anyone in this room who does not know Professor Sternlight? Okay, let me tell you a little bit about Professor Sternlight then. She is our director of the Saltman Center, and she is the Michael and Sonia Saltman Professor of Law. She is a noted authority in terms of conflict resolution scholarship. She's also doing fascinating things in terms of legal education with her latest book, Psychology for Lawyers, which I think is a must-read. So the opportunity to have Professor Sternlight here, who mixes two worlds really, really well, is a delight for me. I'm very proud of everything you do, Jean, and I want to bring you up here.
Thank you all for coming this evening. It's great to see all of you. Dean Rappaport's already said a bunch of what I was going to say, and that's wonderful because then we can keep the introductions nice and short. As she said, this is part of our Peace in the Desert lecture series. What we do through that program is we try to focus on hot spots around the world, places where there are lots of conflicts, and to draw attention to them, educate people about those conflicts. I think we all know that there's probably no hotter hotspot in the world than the Middle East. And it's been that way for a long time. Somebody else agrees with me. What we're hoping is that through drawing attention to these hot spots, through educating people about the hot spots, perhaps we hope we can make a little contribution, a small contribution to try to achieve some better peace in those areas. One of the wonderful things about Michael and Sonia Saltman as sponsors for the Saltman Center for Conflict Resolution is that they not only generously give funding, which helps us with our programs, but even more important, they give energy and they give ideas. And the Streetball Hafla program that you're going to hear about tonight, I think, is just a fabulous idea that they came up with. This idea of using basketball, and Michael Saltman himself will tell you more about the program, but using basketball to try to bring together the two factions in Israel, Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, try to get them to recognize each other's humanity through basketball. As we were thinking about this program, I read an article in the New York Times, and it was a really distressing article. This was back in August. I'm sure a lot of you saw it. Just to read you the first couple lines. The headline was, "Young Israelis held in attack on Arabs." 7 Israeli teenagers were in custody on Monday accused of what a police official and several witnesses described as an attempted lynching of several Palestinian youths, laying bare the undercurrent of tension in this ethnically mixed but politically divided city. A 15-year-old suspect standing outside court said, For my part, he can die. He's an Arab. And of course, we know that those kinds of tensions go both ways. Both groups have plenty of haters in them, plenty of people who are ready to make accusations. And the aspiration for this basketball program is to try to cut through those tensions, try to bring people back to recognize one another's humanity, and try to get some progress towards peace in that area. The way that the program's going to work this evening is Michael Saltman's going to tell you a few words, more than a few words. He's going to describe the Streetball Hafla program and how it worked. Then you're going to see the film, which is about half an hour long, and then we have a really fabulous panel to have some discussion about the film. I'll introduce the panelists afterwards, right before you see them, so I'll, with no further ado, introduce Michael Saltman to come and tell you about the program. Thank you.
I've never been accused of saying anything in a few words, but I'll try, because the movie speaks for itself. And it's a short film, too, so it's more about the concept of the film, and we'll talk about it. My name is Mike Saltman. I'm a longtime Las Vegan. My wife and I, Sonia, have been involved with the law school since inception, and are real big fans of Jean's and Nancy's and the professors in the law school. We have a terrific green spot in Las Vegas with the UNLV Law School. So we're really thrilled to be involved. Let me set the stage for you for the film that we're going to see tonight. But before we start, how many Israelis there might be in the audience? So we got a number of Israelis. And how many people in the audience have been to Israel? A lot. So you're going to see what you know, but this is mostly the northern part of Israel, where there's a much larger Arab, Christian and Muslim population, and of course an extensive Israeli Jewish population as well. This all started, let me also say to you, by the way, this room should be standing room only tonight, and I can't believe it's not, because if we had all the kids that played and their parents and their friends and the coaches, we would have filled this room and it would have doubled outside into the hallway. So it's really too bad that we don't have more of an audience here, and it's always a challenge for us to figure, how do you get on a Tuesday night an SRO audience in Las Vegas, in a place you can't even, it's hard to even park, and so we're always working on how to get more people to these events and how to figure out the logistics better, because we had, for example, Jerry Engel went to the law school and then had to figure out how to get over here and walk over to the student union tonight, but so it goes. You're going to see a film anyway, and the film's going to be, this movie's going to be filmed by the UNLV film department, so it'll get a wider viewing audience. This all started with a trip to Israel. Of the many trips that I've taken, I started going to Israel right after the '67 war. I was living in Geneva and I was working in Israel, and so I got a chance to see Israel in a whole different vantage point right after the '67 war, and worked there on a number of occasions. But then much later, my wife Sonia and our son David, who's sitting right here, and I went on an ADL trip to Israel. In fact, I met Yasser Arafat on that trip. That's another story. In his Ramallah headquarters, actually. But we were leaving Bethlehem. David, our son David, is a real good athlete himself, and was a young guy at the time, and he asked me directly, well, how come the Arab kids don't have the same kind of places to play that the Jewish kids have? And that kind of stuck in my mind. You know, they had, in this case, what we saw back then was some broken tennis courts, not tennis courts, I'm sorry, kind of asphalt soccer fields, football fields, broken baskets on the playground. Kids are still out playing. You're going to see a scene where an Arab kid's shooting baskets on a broken basket. We saw that live and in person, and it was definitely troubling. So we went to the ADL in Jerusalem, run by a terrific woman named Phyllis Jarabli, and I actually wrote her a check, and I said, hang on to the check, and I'm going to come up with an idea where we can bring kids together and see if we can get Arab and Jewish kids doing something together, and sports was the way I envisioned doing this. So first idea was going to be beach volleyball, because there's a lot of terrific beaches, as you know, in Israel. When we play beach volleyball, it's really informal, and I wanted it to be a very informal kind of a sport. And then I was talking to my great friend who's sitting here too, Tommy Jakovic, who's the executive director of the USA Track and Field Foundation Board, and I'm a member of that board with Tommy, and we do lots and lots of things together and talk about this kind of issue on countless occasions, and I said, what do you think of the idea of doing a 3-on-3 basketball tournament in Israel? Because that's about as informal as you can get with basketball. For those of you that play or played as a kid, it's all about playground basketball. Fewer rules, no rules really, a lot of elbows being thrown, no referees, very informal, tough, fun basketball. And we all played it as kids, and some played it to get themselves into the Hall of Fame. We have one of our panelists tonight is Ricky Sobers, who's actually just inducted into the New York Basketball Hall of Fame, and he was one of the great streetball players in New York for his entire youth, and then got to come to UNLV. And there's more about Ricky, because he came to UNLV as a student, and he became an All-American at UNLV, and went on to the NBA and was a star in the NBA. So thrilled to have my friend and our friend Ricky here tonight on the panel with his son Travis, who brought the basketball. And there's a reason for the ball, I'll tell you in a second. So Tommy and I then went to the government. First, the ADL opened up some doors for us, and then we had a big meeting in a small little village. Could be an Arab village, could be an Israeli village. The food was great wherever we were. We met with this government organization, which is the Ministry of Culture and Sport. And Tom and I made a presentation to this group of very serious government people around the room. We needed to have their support to be able to do this. And made a presentation about bringing kids together. They didn't know what they didn't know what streetball was for sure. We had to kind of describe to them the whole idea of streetball, but we went through this explanation. They thought it was a pretty interesting idea. I was sure they were going to say no, because if you go to a government official and ask for something with a vision and a little craziness, they're going to say no. But in this case, with his terrific, inimitable accent, the head of the ministry said, as your firm in America, Nike, would say, let's do it. Great. We're off and running, so let's do it is right. So we then had a friend, also now a terrific friend we met then and now is still a great friend today, named Razi Nujadat, who's a Bedouin Arab, who's a part of the ministry in Israel, and he was kind of our leader and our point man to get us through the whole logistical plan of just trying to put together a basketball tournament. You can imagine, with Arabs and Jewish kids and coaches and parents and government and different issues going on and lots of stress and tension, we were able to kind of get organized and do it. And so we mixed everybody together. And Tommy, to my great credit and his great credit, was also one of the brains and the energy behind a program in the U.S. called Hoop It Up. And Hoop It Up are 3-on-3 basketball tournaments around the country. And Tom ran the programs, and I said, oh man, we got ourselves a great commissioner of basketball. So I agreed to be the guy behind it with Tom. My wife is a big supporter of this program as well. We financially endowed it, and Tommy agreed to run the program. So we have a really perfect storm of putting it together. Almost finished with my notes. We got together a really great group of coaches. This is all about, it's not like schools in Israel don't have basketball programs. Some of them may, but it's all about club sport, almost throughout Europe for that matter, unlike in the U.S. So there are many different clubs throughout Israel, and many Arab clubs, many Jewish clubs. Hardly ever would they come together, if ever, until we brought this program together. But the coaches were great. They had great attitudes. They loved the idea. So we had a bunch of Arab coaches, a bunch of Jewish coaches, and there's no way to tell the difference between them from our point of view. Tom and I speak no Hebrew, one Arabic word, which is Hafla, which means spontaneous party, rough equivalent of spontaneous party. And this idea is to bring kids together, not just to play 3-on-3 basketball with and against each other, but it's also to have a party for the weekend, food, music, friends, and we had a real melange of a lot of folks that came out to these programs. The film only depicts kind of one tournament. We've actually put on 2 so far, one in a Jewish village, one in an Arab village, and very close to each other. And again, even though these kids are only a couple kilometers apart, they never really saw each other or ever played together. So many great side stories, and I'm going to leave out the side stories for now. There are roughly 1.8 million Arabs living in Israel, and most of them live up in the north by Nazareth and Haifa, Tiberias, and that section. And so we focused our energies in the north. Now, mind you, there are like 7.8 million people totally in Israel, so you can imagine there's a very large Israeli Arab population. And we need to bring people together. The idea of conflict resolution from our point of view, and everybody in this room, I'm sure, ascribes to this idea. You got to bring people together, and what better way to do it than through sports? So, We're now going to let the show begin in a moment. I'm just going to tell you that the thing started off, the communication between these kids, the same way that I communicated as a kid, and probably everybody in here ever did as a kid. Can you catch, Gene? Yep. It all started off like that. Here you go. It all started off with just throwing a basketball back and forth, because these kids couldn't even talk to each other. And you're going to see that depicted in this short little film. So you're also going to see my half-inch jump on a shot that somebody took of me taking. So disregard that 50s set shot when you see it. No laughter required. That's basically my opening comment. Let's look at the film together. We can talk about it afterwards, and hopefully we get a nice, tense feeling out of the audience that we actually had with the kids playing sports together in Israel. Thanks very much.
Let's have another hand for the film.
The stairs were there.
So while the panelists are taking their seats, let me just briefly tell you who we have. I told you we had a fabulous panel, and I think we will not disappoint. We tried to get a really varied group up here to give you a series of different perspectives on the film. Some of the panelists you know either through the film or through having heard them before. So Michael Saltman, who you've already heard from, needs to be up here. He's on the panel. Come back. We saw in the film Mr. Tom Jakovic, who's the so-called commissioner of basketball, and in real life is also the executive director of the USA track and field team. Then we have Mr. Ricky Sobers, who you also heard mention of from Mike Saltman. Ricky, as you heard, was a very famous UNLV basketball player, went on to be a professional, and now he's with us again. Then we've got a couple of people who have connections to the area. We have Gilad Berman, who grew up in Israel. He's now at UNLV, a tennis player playing at UNLV, and he's an accounting major. We have Mohammed Nasruddin, who also grew up in Palestine. Now he's at UNLV. He came to Las Vegas, though, when he was 14. And perhaps our most unique panelist in terms of background is Sasha Nizgoda, who describes herself as a Muslim Jew because one parent is Muslim, the other is Jewish. She grew up in New York City. So with all of those perspectives, we're going to have a conversation here, not only about the film, but really more broadly about what programs like this can do or what they can't do. I think you'll hear different perspectives, and then we'll have a bit of time at the end to have some questions from the audience as well. So I'm going to start with Tom Jakovic. I think I'll turn the podium just a little bit so I can look at you guys too. So Tom, we know that from the film that you had run some other 3-on-3 tournaments in the United States before you were recruited to run this program. And you said in the film that this one was unique. And I would imagine that you found it so. How was this different than a typical 3-on-3 tournament that you might have run in the United States?
I can tell you from the moment I got there, for me, just the experience of never having traveled to Israel was fascinating. I think when it really hit me, we first took the court outside the first day, and the kids were just warming up. And I looked up in the sky, and there were fighter jets circling above the courts. And I said, wow. I said, where would you ever see this in the United States? We take so much for granted. You know, we go out and we play ball, and maybe, you know, somebody shuts the lights off at 10 o'clock, or, you know, your mom's ringing a bell and say you got to get home. You know, for these kids, I mean, they're fighter jets. And, you know, Mike and I visited a couple of areas, you know, where there were some battles fought and some other incidents. And, you really, it's a realization, wow, I'm at a place that for these kids, it really is life and death. And I'd say that was, that really hit me.
What were the pressures for you in terms of trying to get the kids to play together, to mix the teams between the Jewish kids and the Arab kids? There was that one scene in the film where I guess the kids were resegregating themselves to become more comfortable. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, it's tough, and I was talking to Ricky about it. So many of these kids, how they look at the other side, as they referred to it in the film, and it's really a byproduct of what they've seen in the media, and they really don't have their own thoughts on who these people are. And I felt that as somebody who's played a lot of basketball, you really get respect for people playing with them, and even in some cases against them. And I would see it over and over again. Kids who were hesitant to play together, and somebody would drive the lane and dish, a Jewish kid would dish it to an Arab kid, and he'd lay it in. And you could just see they gave each other that look, and that look's all about respect. I don't care where you play or who you're playing against. It's teamwork and it's respect, and that really broke down some barriers. And you saw those kids hugging at the end. And so much of that is just respect gained on the basketball court. And it doesn't have to be someone who's the best player. Maybe it's effort. These kids, from the other side, as you saw, they were referred to as lazy. Well, you see some of these kids are hustling and diving. You immediately respect that guy. You're like, man, that guy's busting his tail just like I do. And, that transfers over to everyday life. So that was pretty cool to see.
Michael, you told us before the film started, and we knew your ambitions for this program. You went over there. You were hopeful that this could do something. I've watched this film now quite a few times, but every time I watch it, even though I know it's going to have a sort of a happy ending, I get nervous all over again, because for a while there, it just doesn't look like it's going to work. It looks like these kids don't want to make it happen. They move out of their room. They don't want to sit with each other, and so on and so forth. How did you feel as it was all happening? Were you nervous that your great idea might be a flop, or were you always confident that it would work out in the end?
To be honest, totally nervous. There was that one scene in the movie. David Blumenfeld made the film. David is an American living in Israel, covers the waterfront extensively, is a Newsweek cover photographer. He set his camera up in that one room when the kids were in there just looking at each other and not knowing how to communicate. And I saw the little film rush afterwards. It was tense even seeing it then, but on the spot was definitely tense, because these kids were having a real difficult time the first couple of days. And the real watershed event, simple and small in the movie, but I saw it as a kid myself when I was going to different schools, and I think everybody who's played any sports always sees this. And that was when Almog and Adi were the two class players, the two kids at the end that were high-fiving. Almog finally picks up the ball and throws it to one of his Arab friends, and the communication started just by throwing the basketball back and forth. And from that point on, things started to flow better. It made it easier for Tom to get the teams organized. The teams then started hanging together. The kids were eating together. And also, one little sidebar comment was, there was one fellow talking in the film when they were all out in the garden trying to bring kids together, and they were not agreeing on anything. That young guy is a major in the U.S. military. He's 35 years old. His name's Hamid. He's a Druze. He's not a Jew. He's not a Muslim. He's a Druze, and he's part of the Druze population of Israel. And he was terrific, ADL representative, and just a terrific guy. And he helped bring a lot of the program together with his attitude and his ability as a commander to bring kids together. And that was really a terrific way to break down the tension.
In the film, they show that, and I guess that was part of the ADL training, whatever he was doing there in the circle. Was that a pretty significant part of the basketball camp, the diversity training, or whatever they would call it? That was the ADL contribution here?
Major. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ADL, and not only that, but some things you can't tell unless you know the players, but one coach is describing the game, how to play it, 30 minutes, 20-point game. That guy happens to be a Jewish coach. The other guy that came in the morning and woke up the kids and also tried to get them together in that one little ante room, he's an Arab coach. Unless you know them, you can't tell. And those guys got along extremely well because the coaches all know each other in a small country like Israel. And they played, the ADL and the coaches played a really significant role in in keeping these kids together as much as possible. And they did really hang together toward the end. And we've done this twice now, by the way. The film only kind of shows one tournament. We've done it twice now, and a question may come up later. We're going to do it again, hopefully, in the next couple of years, do a large one. But the coaches and the ADL played a really great role in bringing these kids together.
Mohammed, help us put this in context. You lived in the area until you were 14, as I understand it. What did you see of the relationships between Jewish and Arab kids when you were living there?
Well, first of all, I would like to applaud the Solomon Resolution Center for such a great effort. I'm sure it was a very difficult task to accomplish. As far as for the relationship between Jews and Arabs, I really didn't experience much. I lived in the West Bank, where it's all Arabs, Muslim and Christian, not so many Jews. I think when it comes to the program, it's a great idea to try to expose both groups to each other through sports, so they can maybe understand each other better, overcome their differences, and coexist, hopefully in peace. However, I think that the problem lies far from that point, as in getting along. I think it comes more to the territorial aspect. I mean, regardless of how much you get along with someone, when it comes to property, that goes out through the window. But that's my personal opinion.
So I guess it's a question really of what comes first, right? I mean, do you bring the people together as a way to solve the political problems, or your perspective is maybe the reverse, that you've got to solve some of the major political problems, or you'll never have a hope of bringing people together no matter how many great basketball tournaments you have?
Exactly. I think it lies more in the government than the people, because as in the movie was said, they're actually the same people. I mean, Arabs and Jews have coexisted for many centuries together, but once you get politics involved, that's when the whole problem emerges.
Gilad, you grew up in Israel, and I'm guessing that you had somewhat more contact with some Arab Israelis than Mohammed might have done growing up on the West Bank.
Yeah, I had more, I was around more Arabic people, especially I'm a tennis player, so I traveled the world, and also in Israel, I grew up with Arab players that we played on the same teams, we practiced together all the time. And I think sports is really important to get involved, both of the Arab and Jews. This was a great idea to do this movie as well. When they have something in common, and they will really find the thing between them to get the connection.
How did it work out when there might be some Arab kids on a tennis team? I'm guessing it would have been probably more of the Jewish kids than Arab kids on a team that you would have been on. Am I right about that?
There was more Jews because there wasn't so many Arab tennis players around, because we played professional tennis in Israel. But we all get along really well. We grew up together since we play since we were 14 years old, together until before I came here. And
what about for the non-tennis players? Like when you were in school or something, was there a mixing between the Arab kids and the Jewish kids, or not so much?
No, I grew up in the center of Israel. Most of the Arab people, they are more in the north, and they are more together, and they have everything together, the school and as well. And so I wasn't so exposed for all the Arab and Jews just through the sport.
Mm-hmm. Sasha, you didn't grow up in Israel or in Palestine. You grew up in New York, I believe is right. But you have both a Muslim background and a Jewish background. What was your perspective on this film? What did it make you think about?
Well, I was born and raised in New York City. My mother was born in a Jewish household, and my father was born and raised in Egypt as a Muslim. And it was very important for them to teach both my sisters and I about both of our religions, not just one. So we did go to the mosque on Sundays, and we attended Hebrew school during the week. And it was an eye-opener for me because this film really inspired me. You know, I grew up in New York, and it helped me embrace my diverse background because I lived 8 blocks away from the United Nations. So you can imagine who my friends were. I had friends from Iraq, Israel, China, I mean, you name it, I was friends with them. And the film really inspired me because it shows how we can come together and we can make a difference. And these kids really did want to make a difference, just like most children do. They don't want to live in hatred. And programs like this program is amazing, and it brings them together to find out what they have in common. And it can be done. I'm living proof that it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Ricky, you didn't grow up in Israel or in Palestine. You grew up in the Bronx, so it's not quite the same, but I'm guessing that from growing up in the Bronx, since I grew up in New York City myself, you would have played basketball with kids from a number of different backgrounds. What did you see in your life of playing basketball, both on the streets in New York and then later on at UNLV and as a professional?
No matter where you go, sports is a global language, and it's capable of bridging social, cultural, and religious divides. You know, it can be used to foster understanding and tolerance, and yes, even peace. And having that experience growing up in New York, it just gave me a tremendous opportunity to reach out to others and to play this great game that really is one of the best, in my estimation, it is the best relationship building sport in the world. So, you know, I was tremendously lucky to have that experience of growing up in such a diverse area as New York, and playing with all sorts of people, Italians, and Jews, and you know, just everything that New York has to offer. One of the best opportunities I've ever experienced in my life, for sure.
So you're all given a very glowing picture of it all. Sports are wonderful. They can bring people together from all these backgrounds. And I guess I mostly believe that, except for this. We've had a lot of sports in this world for a long, long time, and we still have a lot of hatred in this world. So I'm not going to direct this question to any particular person, but to all of you, because it's kind of a hard question, which is, so what are we doing wrong? We've got the sports, but we've still got the hate. What else do we need? What can we do next?
Let me give you just a little couple tangential responses to that. One is that you saw Abbas Swan in the film. Truth be known, Abbas Swan was the only Arab on the Israeli national soccer team. Terrific guy, real leader, the kids loved him. When he scored that goal that tied Ireland in the World Cup qualifier, and Israel hardly ever makes it to the World Cup level, a lot of people in Israel booed. Truth be known. Even though he won or tied the game and got him into the next level, Jews in Israel booed. Not all, most didn't, but some did. And it was a comment that was made widely about Abbas Swan. Another guy that came that you didn't see in the film is Dov Hennefeld. Dov Hennefeld was an Israeli basketball player, about the same height as Gilad, maybe a few more inches and a lot more weight. And Dov came and played at Connecticut and took the University of Connecticut team after Ricky had his All-American status. Dov was not All-American, probably All-Israel. But he took Connecticut, I think, to the Final 8 in the NC2A tournament. And he told me some stories how when he was playing for Connecticut, he'd get in some pretty tough struggles. He's a big guy underneath the basket, and he'd hear a lot of you kike, you this, you that. So it isn't all easy and sweet and nice and honey. There's a lot of tension that goes along with that as well. In the main, though, like Ricky just said, kids in sports, no matter where they are in the world, really do get along. And if we could somehow get that in the minds of the politicians, and people that do have these territorial aspects and control can think about what that means. And if they played more sports themselves, it might help. But there's definitely tension out there still. This is not a panacea. And it is, if a basketball basket is a bucket, this is a drop in the bucket. That's all this was. And all we intended to do is just get the ball started just a little bit.
Do others of you have thoughts on that question of, what are, I guess really what I'm asking is, what are the longer-term prospects for programs like this? Is it something that just makes everybody feel, happy for a few days and then it goes away? Or do you believe that these kinds of programs can really have more lasting effect?
For me, I think it comes down in many ways to leadership. I look at a couple of those kids, and I think if they would rise to a position of prominence, they would take that attitude and inspire a lot of people, just like this guy right here inspires people. That's my hope. Somebody who participated in that Hafla was one day in a position of leadership to influence a lot of people, and I think people want to follow winners, and you saw winners out there, so I think to me it comes down to leadership.
Do any of you on the panel have any other thoughts that you want to add? I'm going to throw it open to the audience in a couple minutes here to see what questions they may have, but I first want to invite any of you to add any other thoughts you might have, either about the program or the film, or any questions I didn't ask that you might want to answer.
Mohammed.
As I watched the movie, it was brought up to my attention that the participants were mostly, Arabs, Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews. I think that might have had an influence on the end result, because I think it would have been more productive if it would have been done between Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews, because that's really where the conflict lays between those two groups, because there might be tensions between Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews. However, they still, at the end, Israelis, and they're still sharing a country versus Arab Palestinians who are fighting for the country.
What are your thoughts, Michael? You mentioned earlier that there might be future programs. What have you thought to try in the future?
Segue from that comment is that what we're trying to do now with the ministry and with the territories in the surrounding countries is to have a very large tournament, most likely in Haifa, because Haifa still is in the north, but with not just Israeli Jews and Arabs, but with Palestinian kids from the territories. Also, we've talked to Jordanians, Gazans, and we're trying to bring people from the region into this whole process with us. So my goal and our goal is not just to do this again, but to do it with a much wider regional aspect, so everybody gets a chance to participate, and hopefully the politicians will come as well and see what's going on at the wider regional level.
Great. All right, we've got a microphone set up here if any of you in the audience would like to come up and ask a question. We want to get you to come up to the microphone only because we're recording this, and if you don't come up to the microphone, then we won't have your question recorded. And we're looking for questions, not so much speeches or long comments that anybody might have. Turned the wrong way, but that will work. Thank you.
My name is Gary Emo, and kudos to you, Michael. I think this absolutely marvelous what you undertake. I remember some years ago they had a similar thing, I think, with camps, with young children of the Israelis and Palestinians going to camp, and it was the same camaraderie. And unfortunately, it didn't end in a happy note, because when they
The reality is you have to stay with the program as a leader, and we haven't been there. We're foreigners. You know, Tommy and I went over there as absolute foreigners. You could tell we didn't speak a word of the language except for the word Hafla. That's all we knew, and I knew Ken and a few other things like Todah and not many Hebrew or Arabic words. So it needs the local leadership to sustain this concept. After we had our tournament, there were a few other tournaments like this that were in the Arab and Palestinian, Jewish and Israeli and Palestinian territories, 2 or 3 tournaments, led by Adi. Adi was the Arab kid at the end that kind of high-fived Almag, and he's a leader in the community. By the way, as you know, he's an Israeli Arab, and now he's 18 years old, and he's not in the military, and Almag is in the military, so that's a real issue as well. So it's, Jerry, it takes a lot of continual leadership and beyond Tom and myself and others that were involved with us, and it hasn't sustained itself as well as it should, because there have been Jewish Arab orchestras, there have been Jewish Arab soccer programs, there are multiple attempts at doing this. We're not the only ones, of course, but unless you're there doing it or really pushing this enterprise on a regular basis, they do tend to fade. But like Tom said, hopefully some of these kids and some of the leadership in those kids, when they get a little bit older, if they get a chance to throw a rock or a Molotov cocktail or a grenade at each other, they may think back to throwing a basketball at each other, and maybe that'll cause them some hesitation. But we have a long way to go to try to really sustain this process. So we're just one of, like I say, a little drop in the bucket, and it does need a lot more leadership to keep it going. And the process, and it's tense there. This is a very tense part of the world, obviously. It happened in Northern Ireland. Somehow it happened in Northern Ireland. People stopped wanting to kill each other. People didn't want to die any longer. People somehow figured out the perfect storm to bring a peace process together. And even though it's tenuous in Northern Ireland, it's my goal and hopefully the world's goal that this happens in other parts of the world. And Israel and Palestine and Jordan and Egypt and Gaza are no exception.
We've seen peace in South Africa as well. It's not a perfect situation, but there can be progress. Yeah, David?
I have a kind of a two-part comment question.
Uh-oh, but of you we allow it.
Very brief. One thing to kind of piggyback on what Tommy was saying, and this is my comment. I've always had the belief that, luckily, of course, I not the first-hand belief, but that if there's a young child or a child and their father or brother, cousin gets killed, someone from the other side, they grow up with that in their mind, and they keep it there, and it kind of stays with them. And so I think something like this, like you said, is kind of planting a seed of, you grow up with this as your memory, and that perpetuates for your whole life, and that kind of spreads, I think, is a really cool aspect of this program. And then my other comment / question is that I think there's also a bit of several of the panelists made this comment that it kind of becomes the other person, especially if you haven't met them, becomes something that you glean from the media, or that becomes a stereotype, and they're not a person. And so I think that this is my question is I know this isn't an easy answer, but how you can get this message to be spread, even just that this program has been done, that can have, it seems to me, an enormous spread impact of people that say, wow, this was actually done, and a Jewish kid and an Arab kid got together and they weren't fighting, and just that idea alone, I think, would create a lasting impact.
Those of you from Israel know the Yes cable program. Yes is one of the documentary programs in Israel. This film is on the Yes national television on a fairly regular. Have you seen it in Israel? Okay, it's on fairly regular every couple of months or so. We gave the rights to the Yes program, the Yes people to run this film. It's been shown a few times in Israel, so hopefully it gets traction that way. Just like tonight, we only have we haven't filled the stadium tonight, the arena, but this film, hopefully, the filming of the film is going to get shown to more people, and hopefully that continues to tell the message, because there's no question that we've got to really elaborate this discussion and get it out to many more people, of course.
So my question was, based on one of the last questions and also kind of what you said before, what I got from the movie was kind of a weekend type event, and then the concern is, how does that last past that weekend? And I was curious if there were prospects for programs that maybe didn't end after a weekend, such as a basketball league, like a youth basketball league that continues on, instead of being maybe on a weekly basis, or you also mentioned that you have other programs such as soccer teams or
How about Elijah Tredup when he graduates from Boyd Law School, going to Israel and heading up the league to bring kids together on a regular basis? It is. Okay. Here, here. That needs to be done. I agree.
My question would be for Mr. Sultan. What resistance did you receive when starting the program, especially from the families? What I got from the movie is that the family seemed a little bit more supportive given the situation. So what, in particular instances, where you received a lot of resistance from the families?
I didn't quite get the whole question, but I think you said, what was the family support? Is that what the question was?
What resistance did you receive from the families, especially when starting the program? Because what I got from the film was that they were very supportive given the situation. Did you have a difficult time recruiting these young men?
The Arab families were more mothers and fathers. I think were more supportive of the program than the Jewish mothers were. You saw the one scene where Almag's mother was somewhat resistant because he hadn't been really well behaved. He's a pretty interesting guy and real bright and capable of all kinds of behaviors. So his mother wasn't real keen on him going. But the real interesting part about the families was that afterwards we had 2 award ceremonies. You didn't see the award ceremonies. And the Arab families came out with their entire family. So this is an interesting demographic issue too, by the way. If an Arab family, this is all the north, up around Nazareth area and all those little small villages, and very supportive Arab families after and before the fact and after the fact. And they would come out, for example, now they're Israelis, right? And they would come out with the mother, the father, and maybe their whole family. It could be 7 or 8 children. And the Jewish families would come with their 1.5 kids. And then the Arab mothers would come up and say, thank you for doing this, and somebody might translate for us, or they might say it in English. And to a large extent, the Arab families were much more supportive, I thought, than the Jewish families were, because they want their kids, and they are Israelis, of course, but they want their kids to be able to be part of a system where everybody can at least be on some similar page. So to that extent, the Arab families were much more supportive, I felt, than the Jewish families were, except that kids all came, and they were 50-50 right down the line. Coaches were 50-50 Arab and Jewish, even though they might have been Muslim and Christian, and the same thing with the kids themselves. It was a split down the middle. The first one was 160. I think we had maybe 180 at the next one, and they were split down the middle 50-50. But to a large extent, the Arab population was more supportive. And one little small tangent was that we would we'd all eat together in these big halls where we had all the food. And I remember that Sonia and I would never try to get in the front of the queue. We'd always try to be in the back, and Tommy was out working with the kids playing basketball, so we were eating at the same time. And on more than one occasion, this is a classic Israeli story, we'd be in the queue, maybe like middle of the queue, working toward getting our food, and all of a sudden somebody would be elbowing us. It was always a Jewish kid elbowing us to get out in front. The Arab kids were much more respectful. They were more polite. Just an observation that we had at that time. I don't know if that was because of us. I don't know what that was a circumstance, but if you've been to Israel or you're in Israel, you know that elbows get thrown at bus stops, not just in basketball tournaments. But the Arab families overall and the kids were more respectful and more supportive. Did that answer your question?
Yes, and if I may, I just want to ask one other question. What was the process when recruiting these young men? Did you go to the schools? What did they have to fill out in order to be part of the program?
Didn't quite get the question again. But
How did you actually recruit the kids? Did you go to schools or go to families? How did you get them signed up?
the Ministry of Culture and Sport have access to all these clubs. They kind of have a national overview on the entire sport world in Israel, cultural aspects, in this case sport. So they got the word out throughout the entire country, and then most of the respondents were in the northern part of Israel, and that was, through the clubs, the club leadership, and the coaches. And those are the ones that brought the kids out. So we had this terrific group of coaches, and maybe, I've forgotten how many we had, but we had 10 or 15 number of coaches that came out. All of them were great athletes, by the way, too, and had real charisma with their kids, so that when they said there's going to be a tournament in Nahalal, there's going to be a tournament in this particular village, that really got the kids inspired. So it came through the leadership of the coaches, and they were across the board, Arab, Jewish, whatever, they were terrific, and they were the ones that brought the kids to the table, to the court. Thanks.
Thank you.
One thing One thing I'd add too that shocked me when I went over there for the first time, how big the sport of basketball is in Israel. Mike and I attended a game between Jerusalem and Maccabi Tel Aviv, and the atmosphere would be very similar to an NBA Finals. I mean, you've got 10 or 12,000 people packed in an arena, and really with the enthusiasm of a World Cup soccer match. I mean, they're singing and just chants, and it's a crazy atmosphere and very unique. So, I mean, the country loves basketball, so I think they really embraced our program.
We're going to take these 2 additional questions, but then don't leave because we have our own little Hafla party for you afterwards.
As a young Jewish American woman, I often see that conflict resolution, political peace talks are often male-centered or male-focused. Have there been any thoughts, or what thoughts or ideas do you have on including young women and young adolescents in Israel, females, in sports tournaments or in conversations like these to become more inclusive? Have you had any thoughts on it?
Well, we did consider having a tournament for the girls, because they're young women, the girls, and it was just such a logistic. And yeah, the answer was that we did think about it. It's absolutely in the cards. Something that we couldn't do at the time because the logistics were just so difficult to bring that together. But we certainly didn't mean to be male-centric by it. We really did think about women as well, and girls, by the way, in Israel, of all religious backgrounds and religious, secular, whatever, they have real interest in sports as well. And there's tons of great tons of great young girls playing basketball in Israel. But like Tom said, most of the kids play soccer. And typically what happens is the girls and the boys, they somehow rise up and start playing other sports, and basketball is the one that takes over for them. So there were many more young boy basketball players, young men, than there were girls. But it is in the cards, and I would suggest when you align yourself with Elijah, you come over to Israel and you put together the girls program, because there's definitely a reason for women to be involved. And of course, you know, women play a very big role in Israel on all sides of the line, Arab, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish. So
Wonderful.
thanks.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Shalom, salam alaikum. I am Yudi, and first off, I want to thank Mr. Saltman for taking the time to make this film to share with us out of your busy schedule. I was much appreciated, and hopefully more people will start taking the initiative to take action on important subjects in the world like this outside of our busy schedules. But I wanted to touch on something that Muhammad pointed out in his response. I just returned from 2 months in not just Israel, but I was in West Bank and the Palestinian side of Hebron, Ramallah, and Bethlehem. And your film, it did have some oomph of, it's nice showing that these kids get along, but in the later films, if your target demographics the United States, do you intend on getting more? When I was in the Palestinian side, you keep hearing about 45 and 67, and it's kind of hard for a car to drive forward if everyone's just always looking in the rearview mirror. You're inevitably going to keep crashing and crashing, and despite my opinions or facts on the matter, do you plan on to get more of an effect? What is the end goal? Do you want more Americans to go and support the cause, or are you going to start touching more on the education of the past and the dates and make it a little more of outside of just the basketball and start getting into proposing resolutions? And ultimately, how do you, if other people want to get involved, I'm making a film myself, how do you propose we could join your cause?
Of course, my dream is that people get along. So Arab, Jew, whatever the backgrounds are, they find a way to get along. That's a real difficult, easy thing to say and a very difficult proposition. Sports is just one way, of course, and we just picked out this little small segment of something really informal, this 3-on-3 basketball idea. I'm active right now in Israel and in the U.S. on a water project, completely unrelated to sports, but it's water. And water is the lifeline, if you will, of the entire Middle East. And I went with Patricia Mulroy, who's the executive director and manager of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, to Israel, and with her signed a memorandum of understanding with the largest water distributor in Israel called Mekarot. And as I looked at that Mekarot, this is all water distribution, pretty much desal from the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. Those are the two basic sources. In the Golan Heights, there's some water that feeds itself into Galilee and down the Jordan River. And I thought, what an incredible peace possibility would be just the water distribution in the Middle East. So just think about that. We have all these dry, arid lands all throughout the entire Middle East. And if these people had their together and were to sit down and figure out how to distribute water equitably and use the technology that the Israelis have been able to develop and the Saudis have been able to develop and share it with the Egyptians and the Gazans and the Jordanians and get the technology going back and forth. And that's a big picture thought. I'm not the only one. I'm just a small cog in that wheel, but that thought is going on today as we speak. So there are other ways to achieve peace in the world, in the Middle East, not just with basketball, but could be other areas. And I think that water is probably one of the key ways to bring people together, for sure in the Middle East, let alone in the U.S. and China and every place else where there's a water distribution issue. So long-winded response again. There are many more ways to skin a cat, and it's not just through basketball and sports, but it's also through other vehicles that we can use to bring people together. And the more hands-on you get, and we're, like I say, we're a couple of foreigners, Americans that went over to Israel. This is another sidebar story. Didn't even come close to answering your question, but Tom and I went together to Israel, and Tom is we were terrific friends, and he hadn't been to Israel, and we go to Israel together, and anybody that's been to Israel will know this, and Israelis for sure will know this. And we were leaving Israel, just to show you how it works, and we're leaving Israel at the airport, and the security in Israel is very, very tight and very, very rigid, and there's lots of reasons for tight security and educated, well-trained people at the multiple levels of security to get in and get out of the country. And I'm in and out like within 5 minutes, as I have this VIP entry exit program I got, and Tom had it too, right? Tom gets caught, and they started asking him questions. Well, where have you been? He said, well, I'm not sure. I've been up north in an Arab village. Oh boy, and all of a sudden, the entire security system clamped down. 4 hours later, he was trying to get out of the country, let alone get into the country. So, didn't mean to tell that story because it's another story, but just the complexity of that part of the world and the whole security issues and the apparatus and the tension and stress of people was exhibited through that one aspect. But, long-winded answer, there are other ways to bring peace to the world and to the Middle East. And I sure hope that we all play our role in picking up on that and doing whatever we can to help push it forward. And for sure, that's our goal. And our dream always with the Saltman Center is that it's the vehicle for that and a venue for that discussion. So I hope that as we grow the Saltman Center in this community, and Dave Shearer, who's sitting in the back of the room, brings water more to the fore, we'll bring the Saltman Center into this discussion and have more conflict resolution of this kind through these discussions. So thanks for being here tonight and your question. Tough question, no answer.
To everybody, you did a great job. Thank you.
Thanks.
We've had sports as a way to bring people together. We've now talked about water as a way to bring people together. Outside, we have food as a last way to bring people together. Let's have a big hand for the panelists for the Saltmans.